Good evening, everyone. I'm Rayan.
And I'm Elena.
And we're here representing the Helvetian Investment Club here at the University of St. Gallen. We're both a little bit nervous, but mostly excited to be welcoming Mr. Sergio Ermotti here.
We're now going to give you a quick introduction into his very notable career. Mr. Ermotti started his career as an apprentice at Merrill Lynch, taking on various roles over the year, and then quickly ascending to co-head of global equity markets in 2001. 4 years later, he served as head of markets and investment banking at the UniCredit Group, moving on to Group Deputy CEO responsible for the corporate and investment banking division, as well as private banking. In 2011, he then took on the position of Group CEO of UBS.
In 2020, Sergio Ermotti was elected to the board of directors at Swiss Re, and since April 2021, he's been serving as their chairman, succeeding notable HIC alumnus Walter Kielholz. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming Sergio Ermotti. First off, just thank you very much for coming here.
Pleasure.
Is the mic all good? Perfect. So, Mr. Ermotti, you started your career off as an apprentice, ascending over time to become CEO of UBS, and now chairman of Swiss Re. You've mentioned earlier the importance of character and experience rather than just having a diploma. Given this, what would you see as the advantages of actually getting a diploma, like many of the students in the audience right now and myself, over going and starting off as an apprentice earlier and building experience?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here and having an opportunity to share some thoughts and also particularly to hear maybe later on your questions. Well, I guess first of all, the two paths to enter a professional life are both very valid. The one of more academic path is clearly giving you more structured theoretical knowledge, and that, in my point of view, is also extremely important. So then at the end of the day, as I say, that will need to be enhanced by professional experience and the ability to grow that knowledge, adapt that knowledge to the market environments, to the needs in the job markets, and to stay competitive as a person, as an individual in the labor market. So I see this as a starting, the first building block. You may say, well, I've been studying till 18, 20. In any case, yes, that was the pre-building block. Now, if you want to talk about your professional life, this is a building block. Both are very good. This one is more theoretical, and you need to know that after such an experience, you will need pretty much quickly to get up to speed with real life.
Well, and being responsible for starting Swiss capital markets operations for Merrill Lynch with only 27 must have been a huge challenge. Which key qualities do you believe that you possessed that you were able to take on that role at such a young age?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to say which quality I had, but I guess it would have been. Well, I guess I was very passionate, and I was very committed to do things, and that probably was, of course, I brought some skills that they were looking for, but probably they got convinced by my passion for what I was doing and what I was thinking about should be done for the future. So I think it was a combination of two elements, and of course, if I go back and we are talking about 1987, so it was only possible, to be honest, because my new employer, the one that offered me that opportunity, was an American firm. It was obviously outside the scheme of how you should prepare and go through a classical path of a career in Switzerland. But to be honest, I decided to go through that route. That was my decision, not to go through the classical Swiss corporate route, because I knew it would be different and more structured and subject to a lot of preconditions that you have to do certain things at a certain age, and you need to stay at that level in the organization for certain years, and so on and so forth. So I took the chance to go into a more competitive environment, risking that if you fail, you are out pretty quickly.
So beyond your core competencies and a huge knowledge set, what do you believe were your key soft skills, apart from being passionate, that allowed you to succeed? And what are the soft skills needed for people nowadays, as we are, to succeed in such a competitive environment?
Well, other than maybe complementing a little bit what I said before, also basically the courage and to take on something new was definitely something. And also because when I left the previous employer, I already had a pretty good, I was happy. I wasn't so unhappy. But I saw an opportunity and I left the comfort zone. I mean, in my first step, after when I left the bank I used to work for in Lugano when I was 25, I basically, I'm telling you just to understand the concept, they told me the fact that, well, if you stay a couple of years here, you're going to go very rapidly to a vice president position, something's very rapid. And that's the reason I say, well, that's the reason I'm leaving, because I know. So that was the courage. Now, seriously, the part that I think was fundamental was back then, but also until today, is maybe the ability to attract and get people around me that were complementary to my skills, and to get good people to work for me. I mean, at the end of the day, you go nowhere if you don't have good people working for you. And I guess at the end of the day, in order to attract and retain good people, they need to see something. So it's not so comfortable for me to talk about myself in that way, but that's probably the way people saw it.
So in previous interviews, you've spoken about how some of the best decisions you've made in your career were made against consensus, such as ignoring the calls from journalists in the media to sell the US wealth business and shut down the investment bank following the rogue trader scandal. How are you able to build conviction in your view when it is against consensus?
Well, it's not by just, I'm not taking contrarian views for the sake of doing that. I mean, you need to be fairly analytical in doing that. So you need to really go through, analyze what happened before, what should happen, what are the fundamental value, or the value that is not fully exploited by a certain activities. And I felt that, that analysis was lacking. The people that were indicating or that, there was an easy path in restructuring the bank back then were just very simplistic in their approach, and making things way too easy. So that for me was the challenging part in how to develop a counter position that had arguments. And again, so understanding why we got where we got, and fully understanding our strength. For example, back then our ambition was to be the leading wealth manager in the world. So for me, the starting position was to say, how can I sell a very big business in the most important wealth management market in the world? So maybe it's necessary, but is it really coherent with the strategy? And then when you look at that and you see, okay, can we turn it around? Can we do things? And so, it was an analytical issue. And then I go back into the question, you have to have the courage and to manage those external forces. And most importantly, the passion and the conviction level to convince the people working with you, for you, to follow you in that.
And this courage you mentioned, is it something that you had from a very early age, or is it something that you developed over your career?
I guess I don't remember learning that. So it's something that comes with the personality and the attitude to risk reward. So maybe my days early days as a trader helped me to understand trade-offs, and that's probably, the fact that you need to take decisions, in many cases quick decisions. In some cases you can think about, in some cases you have no time to think about, or almost no time, or you don't even realize. So that was a combination of things that you develop naturally. So it's always, and most importantly, taking certain decisions in life, in business, in anything. You can't really wait till you have 100% of the information, or even 90% of the information. In some cases, you need to accept that 70% is enough, and you need to be disciplined and willing to accept that the focus has to be to change the 30% you missed. And yet, naturally, people have a tendency to be defensive on the 30% they misjudged. And eventually, that's the reason why you can make a difference. At the end of the day, the vast majority of people, they can come to the 60, 70. The one that makes the difference is when you make a mistake, how quickly you turn it. How quickly you admit you made a mistake. Or how quickly you are open to be told you made a mistake.
Great, thanks.
So further, you've mentioned that apart from your courage and your passion, complementary people to your skill set have really helped you in succeeding in your position. And diversity, equity, and inclusion have become an increasingly relevant topic. What are some of the key initiatives that you're most proud of implementing when you were part of senior leadership that enabled people from different backgrounds to take on positions as yours?
Well, first of all, I guess coming from the Italian part of Switzerland, as a Swiss citizen, we are working in the last now 15 years or so, working for global organizations based in Switzerland, allowed me to create an understanding for different cultures, different ways of seeing things, and by the way, also understanding what it means being a minority. Not always very easy, from the people coming from the south of Switzerland, coming to Zurich and working in Zurich, and so on and so forth. So that was definitely something that I guess helped me to appreciate the need and the value that can be brought to any dynamics, business or cultural dynamics, personal dynamics in seeing diversity. If I go back into what I'm most proud, I probably remember appointing one of the first female top executive at Merrill Lynch in 98, 99 as a chief operating officer of the European business. Was something that's not very usual back then.
So now there are a lot of discussions regarding quota-based systems in employment. What is your take on implementing those quota-based systems on diversity for management or leadership positions?
Well, my take on implementing is that we have to implement it. So, so the issue is that if the question is about what is my take on the necessity to have a quota in order to or a mandatory quota in order to achieve certain targets, well, it's unfortunate. Maybe it was necessary to drive the discussions, although, what we need to do is to make sure that we maintain a strict discipline in assessing quality. Because at the end of the day, if you really want to promote diversity, gender diversity, cultural diversity, which, by the way, is very easy in Switzerland, because the cultural diversity is almost, if you look at all the major multinationals, global organizations, many corporates in Switzerland, even if they are more regional or national, we have a lot of different cultures represented at board level and executive levels. You know, if you compare it to the rest of Europe and many other countries in the world, US or Asia, you would find the vast majority being local, domestic citizens in the board. So we have a strong, you know, the Swiss cultural heritage of how we are set up in Switzerland is well reflected also in the way we manage boards. Now, the gender diversity, I think that what we need to do is to do it in a way that is respectful of a process and the quality. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to have anybody feeling that you get promoted or you got where you got only because you are female or you are of different, you know, culture or ethnics, right? But rather for your quality. So, but I guess without a mandatory quota, it would have probably been difficult to achieve that in such a short period of time. Now, what I'm facing, for example, is the fact that external forces are asking for all and now versus allowing a transition. And I'm really resistant, and here I'm taking a contrarian view, and saying, I'm not gonna ask people to step down prematurely from the board, for example, only because I need to achieve a quota. But of course, I'm committed to say that every time I have somebody stepping out, for whatever reason, or because their tenure limit is over, then I can make a commitment that my focus will be to onboard females, not compromising on quality, and we will achieve those targets. But, you know, I don't think it's the right way to go to basically say, well, throw out good people because you want to free up. That's not what none of us wants to see, or I guess none of us. But
Great, thanks for that comprehensive answer. A common concern we got from students is that they're concerned that a highly successful career in business comes at the expense of family life. Do you think there's any truth to that at all? And how did you manage to balance your family time and external relationships while handling such demanding positions such as CEO of UBS and now chairman of Swiss Re?
yeah, I mean, look, for me, maybe the best people to answer that question would be my families rather than me. But I think that I managed over my career to keep a fairly good discipline between personal and private life and professional life by really imposing myself, for example, that I would rarely miss a weekend with the family. You know, I would always look at being back on a Friday or latest, in few cases, Saturday morning, and from any trip, and taking my time off, also socializing and keeping my friendships that were the traditional one that have nothing to do with business. It's very important to keep your life, keep your true life, not the one that is associated with people inviting you or to places or to events only because the role you have and not because of who you are as a person. It's very important that people, you know, not taking yourself too seriously in that sense, fully understanding that dynamics is important to really allocate the time and the quality between yourself, very important, your family, and the professional life. That's very important. So I did it through that. I'm happy. I had to do some sacrifices, of course, but I don't feel such a big issue. So, but again, probably my wife and my sons are better at answering that question.
So when you left UBS, you mentioned that you might miss the source of adrenaline that your daily life at UBS as the role of a CEO gave you. How have you replaced that source of adrenaline in your new role at Swiss Re?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to say that I don't miss it so much. And every time I miss it, I think also the part that I'm not missing at all, and that goes away very rapidly. So I think that today I enjoy still a very interesting job that keeps me busy, but more importantly, I'm able to manage my agenda in a much more flexible way. I was saying before that, I used to have my agenda being de facto managed by the governance path of things to be done. So 70% or so was taken by things that I have to do. Now 30% is driven by that, and the rest I can drive the agenda the way I want with internal Swiss Re matters, but also with external engagements, both professionals or personals. So I think is an evolution of my professional life, and the one that clearly is less intense, less adrenalinic, but also more enjoyable in a sense.
And what else would you say is different now that you are in a non-executive position apart from a more flexible schedule?
Well, again, I was making the analogy before that is the difference between being on a football team and being a captain and playing every match and being the trainer. So very simple. You still have a little bit of interest in the game. You are close to the pitch. You may, if you are still good, you may be asked to play 10 minutes at the end, but it's a different role. So it's an evolution.
Great, thanks. So now we'd like to move to some questions on the wider market and the economy before opening up to some questions from the audience. So the first question we have, the top 5 investment banks by fees across Europe, Middle East, and Africa are year to date are American banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and Citi. We're seeing the US investment banking presence in Europe increase. And historically, European banks and boutiques have been able to use their local knowledge and presence to cement their positions. However, with the ambitions of American players to grow and expand in Europe, how do you think that European investment banks will be able to continually compete?
Yeah, I mean, I never say never, but I think it's going to be very, very tough for European banks and investment banks to be the kind of a full service investment bank that, compared to the one you mentioned. So I think that's the name of the game, has to be specialized, to be within investment banking, picking up the areas where you believe you can be competitive, both at regional but maybe even at global level. And most importantly, which is one of the reasons, is also to understand that twofold. It's extremely difficult to grow and compete with American firms in the US. So never let yourself into the dream of entering that bulge bracket in the US. And try to focus on your strengths locally. And number 2, accept that the regulatory framework in Europe and Switzerland has been and is still very penalizing for investment banks. I think it's a huge mistake. We're going to pay the price for that. But the people who are driving that agenda won't be there to pay the price when the times come. But I don't think it's very healthy for any economy to be so dependent from external supplier of services, although the American banks are very good, very present, and so on and so forth. But I do think the strength of an economy, of a financial system, is also measured in the ability to have players that are global, have global reach, and are able to compete on a fair basis with others. And I don't think that the competitive, there is no level playing field in the way banks are regulated and nowadays.
Great.
According to the 2021 Swiss Re annual report, global insured losses from natural disasters have been increasing by 5 to 7% over the last decades, with the potential for disaster-prone areas to become uninhabitable or at least too risky to be insured. The effects of climate change are likely to make matters worse. Do you think that some areas or risks will become uninsurable due to climate change?
Some areas are already uninsurables in a sense, or de facto there is no demand or it's too expensive. If you think about it, in the last decade, the last 10 years or so, the amount of losses from natural catastrophes events was $2.4 trillion, and only around 900 billions were insured. So that means the delta 1.5 trillions was paid by governments or by owners losing their assets or part of their assets. So in a sense, there is already something like that. But Nat Cat losses are increasing not only because you have a higher frequency of events, but also because, first of all, the value of the properties affected by those losses is also increasing. There is more concentration, urbanizations. Not all, in many cases, the tendency is to rebuild where it's likely to happen again. So there are different elements that or different levers you can use to reduce the risk of not being able to be insured or have a coverage. The reality is that the big events could be more under control. The real issue that we are facing more and more are floods, wildfires, and all these kind of so-called secondary perils that are coming with a higher frequency than before. And those one are really the one that may create an issue going forward. So it's very important that, where you build, how you build, it's part of the equation. It's very important also to cure the problem. Now, some of this is happening because of climate changes. It's very important to accept that we need to address and tackle that issue. At the same time, we need to manage also the challenges on how to get there without creating side effects or that are too costly. It's the name of the game, but there is still a good ability to provide coverage, but the bar is going up in what you need to do in order to be eligible for that.
And what measures is Swiss Re taking to protect itself from that risk?
Well, of course, we are investing a lot in modeling the risks with more and more emphasis in going forward elements, projecting through, with technology, with, people, know-how, how things are developing. And, in many cases, we are helping not only by providing capital and coverage, but also by advising clients and ourselves on how to manage, what is the likelihood of something happening in a certain place. For example, we help people to say, don't build there because the likelihood that, water rise is going to go up in the next 10 years in that place is much higher than if you move it to 2 miles away from there. So we are investing a lot in modeling, in technology, in forecasting the future. Also, by the way, the Nat Cat and events are not only affecting the property, but also life and health businesses, the quality of life, the air, pollutions, and things like that. are also something that are then affecting our business from a life and health standpoint of view, mortality risk, and so on and so forth.
Great, thanks. So the last question before we open up to the audience, one more on the kind of climate change topic. Swiss Re is committed to become net zero by 2050, and Swiss Re announced that they're looking to tighten support for businesses with thermal, coal, oil, and gas. And the same is true for some peers like Munich Re. At the same time, Europe's been concerned about energy security due to the Ukraine crisis and faces rising energy prices. So how do you think firms like Swiss Re should balance the trade-off between energy security right now and ambitions towards net zero?
Well, by keeping in mind that long-term strategic patterns, by measuring almost on a, if not quarter to quarter, but frequent basis, at least yearly basis, how well you do in getting close to your targets versus managing the tactical challenges. For example, you mentioned Ukraine. It's definitely a huge challenge because, it was easy for us to say a year ago or two or so, it was easy to say, well, we're going to phase out coal from coverage, or we're going to phase out certain most polluting oil and gas producers. We already stopped a while ago to give coverage to the 5% most polluting oil and gas producers. The intention in 23 is to go up to 10%. Now, that's feasible. But if we want to go to 20% or we want to go faster, we would then create a side effect, huge side effect, on society economically, and going and touching, by the way, also not only quality of life in a sense that instead of having a temperature in this room of 22 degrees, you go to 21. In some cases, you bring people back into a very difficult and stressful position when you talk about emerging markets. So doing certain things for an idea, a target that is the ambition may create a side effect that is more costly short-term to society. How to manage that balance is extremely challenging. Also because at the end of the day, you see the world is getting very polarized on this topic. The narrative was led for many years by the more extremist part of the equation in enforcing the agenda. Now, the counterbalancing effect is that is developing very rapidly a group of people who are taking the other extreme view. So the challenge for us in the middle, for us in general, for all, is quite big. Because you heard recently some people are saying, oh, if you exclude oil and gas, you don't get business from us. So that's not really helpful. But what it means, in some cases, on one side of the argument or on the other side of the argument, is to say, no, it's too much. We go too far. We stop. You don't let unreasonable demand for short-term results to create what I believe is the overarching theme. Because when you look at the ESG topic, the umbrella that stays above that is sustainability. And then you need to put yourself in a framework. You have to do the transformation in a sustainable way. And in a sustainable way means taking in account all aspects of the issue, and not only the one who is more loud and present on media.
Great, thanks very much. So now we'd like to open up some questions from the audience. So does anybody have any questions? And maybe Leonard, if you can help me out here.
So thank you very much for being here. I have a question which could be a little bit biased regarding your past position as Group CEO of UBS, but you have Ryan mentioned the problematic situation regarding a few European investment banks. But in terms of Swiss investment banks, we have Credit Suisse and UBS being the most notable players. But Credit Suisse is currently a little bit in trouble, people would say. What do you think differentiated the UBS from Credit Suisse not being in the same position that Credit Suisse is right now?
I would say, it's very difficult for me to say what they could have done different or obvious. I mean, but we were convinced early on in 2011 and 12 that number one, what I mentioned before. So the game was likely to be over for European banks to be a kind of one-stop shop for everything around investment banking and to be part of the top five, de facto. And because, the dynamics of the last few years demonstrated that, it was very difficult. And number two, most importantly, that regulation was changing rapidly and would affect a lot of the businesses in terms of capital consumption and therefore return on capital. And basically, if you would have looked at the historical numbers and even putting fairly positive growth number around a future plan, considering a mild, our version of what we were expecting to happen from a capital increase or a regulatory capital increase that was on the table, it was very clear that risk-reward was not there. So we took a clear view that it would be extremely difficult to make regulators change their view, not only in Switzerland, but particularly in Europe. And the number two is that was more of a personal conviction, that you didn't need to be a one-stop shop to be a strong, credible player in investment bank if you are very good in certain areas. That was probably the things that, and our view was the core of the bank where we would be recognized as a leader if we do a decent job was, being the leading bank in Switzerland with not a big market, but very, call it healthy and a profitable market if you do it well, was an interesting value proposition. Being the leader in wealth management globally was a value proposition that should be at the center of the strategy, where investment bank and asset management, institutional asset management, would be complementary to the strategy. Very important element to contribute to the other two, but complementary, not the core business. That was the defining difference. Probably other players, not by the way, I think that focusing only on Credit Suisse is wrong. I mean, you look at other banks, Barclays, Deutsche, other people, rightly or wrongly, took a view that the situation post the financial crisis would change and people like us exiting part of the business would be an opportunity to gain market share. Turned out to be a wrong bet.
Thank you for being here. And I was wondering when we were talking about the counterbalances between the both extremes in the whole climate debate, and when you're positioning leadership already and the whole debacle of the premiership in England, as a leader with your own experience, is it more important to push your own agenda, to push your ideals, or to balance between the factions within the institution that you work for? And as a little question, what does it take to reach the position you've reached?
Well, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think if you want to win a war, you need to be willing to lose some battles. And if you basically go one way and you just don't compromise and don't find ways to, navigate the challenges, you won't be successful, no matter in personal relationships, in business, in politics, in anything. I don't think that you can impose anything without taking in consideration, the kind of environments you are operating. So, to me, is of course, from time to time, you need to be decisive, but you need to pick up when is the right time. When do you use your silver bullet? You can't use silver bullet every time you shoot. You need to understand when is the time to use one and when it's time to use another. And in a sense, what you see more and more, the tendency is to overpromise and underdeliver. So it's not easy to be elected with underpromising, but probably there are times in which people, we as a citizen, probably would prefer to hear the truth rather than a sugar-coated kind of song on how things are going to be nice. And we know, for example, in this environment, what you recently mentioned in the UK, nobody can argue that having less taxes should create more value for the economy over time. But then you have to pick up the right moment to do it. Are you able to finance it? Is it credible? Is it socially responsible to do it at that point in time? So, having the right idea and doing it too quickly is can be as bad as being wrong to start with. So,
Thank you very much. My question regards regulation, and we've talked about it before. Considering that you've, in your professional career, have worked through various market cycles, ultimately being appointed Group CEO of UBS after the financial crisis, first of all, where do you see regulation headed right now, and where should it be headed to minimize the risk of moral hazards while not having to live out the detrimental effects of a default?
I think that, in my point of view, regulations has addressed many of. By the way, I was never against the fact that we needed to be better regulated, because it's fair to say that banks badly used the more flexible environment that we had before the financial crisis, and something needed to be done. So that was right. I think that we went too far. Or at least we went far enough, and there is no need to constantly put more requirements on banks, because at the end of the day, over time, the cost of what banks and financial intermediaries are doing, but also any business is doing, over time, if they want to be successful, they need to be profitable, and if they want to be profitable, they will need to increase the cost of the services they do, and therefore they make society pay for that extra cost. So I think that the last few years now, 3-4 years, with before COVID, during COVID, and even now, banks have demonstrated a resilience capacity. In many cases, they demonstrated that they are part of the solution rather than a problem, and the underlying problem is coming from somewhere else. In some cases, it may now come from shadow finance or shadow banking. So all the activities that were disintermediated out of banking are now going somewhere else and may create potentially a problem. So the focus going forward should be to better understand where are all those risks and how can they affect not only the banking industry as a second order effect, but also the economy, and most importantly, the people, savers. I mean, if you look at what happened in the UK a couple of weeks ago, was absolutely a clear demonstration that all of a sudden you have pension funds under severe stress in terms of their finances. And if you talk about a pension fund, you're talking about, the money of everybody, really. So in some cases, maybe a shift of focus on what are the priorities before big issues happen would be good.
Great. Maybe the second over here. There was another question.
Good evening, Mr. Ermotti. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, truly inspiring the career. You didn't need to talk about today, but we all know about it. What fascinates me the most, I must say today, is when you talk about your own country and particularly Ticino. So what I start to become interested in is to ask you, when you sacrifice basically being in your own country in a way for your career and your mission, is that part of the equation to come back, as you did, and to then lead companies and organizations in your own country? Is it part of the mission to come back at one point, or when did you understand you wanted to be back in Switzerland?
No, honestly, I think that's my career path going from after my early days in Lugano. I went at Citibank for a couple of years and then 17 years at Merrill Lynch and then UniCredit. I honestly thought that was my kind of environment, was more non-Swiss international environment. I had a couple of opportunities during my career maybe to join the Swiss banks, but at that point in time was not the right moment for me. And of course, it took a few minutes for me to decide to take on the UBS offer. It was not to be CEO, by the way. When they offered me, I was out of UniCredit, and within 24 hours I got a call from UBS that they wanted to talk to me about joining the executive board. For me, mentally, of course, I was thinking about this is a great way for me to close my circle, my career, starting from an apprentice to be on the executive board of the largest bank in Switzerland, and maybe back then contribute to bringing back the bank to where it belongs was, for me was already that. At that point in time, I can assure you, I would have said, I'm extremely happy about my career. I would have never thought that after 6 months, I would become CEO. So in a sense, it's also a matter of being at the right place, at the right time, and willing to take a decision one way or the other.
Great. Are there any more questions? Oh, yeah, right. Oh, sorry, Ben.
So first of all, thank you so much for being here and giving this informative talk. Coming back to the environment, I mean, what are your stance on Florida and offering off insurances there? Because clearly they're having hurricanes every single year. And is that a region which is profitable, so to speak?
Well, still profitable if you don't deploy too much capital. Yes, let's put it that way. You need to stay very, very careful which areas you can insure. You take the risk that, of course, when you go through that, it may happen, but the frequency and of the events and the mitigating infrastructure that prevents the full damage to happen allow us still to be present in the market. But of course, more and more, Florida is a good point. More and more, there are parts of Florida that have a hard time to be insured, and that's the reason why the local government is asked to step in with an insurance coverage. But at the end of the day, when we do that, taxpayers are it's not for free. People think it's for free, and it's not for free. You pay it back through taxes. So, hence the necessity for society to address the issues I mentioned before. How can you reduce the risk? Climate, construction, where to build or rebuild is absolutely critical. But I think that for the foreseeable future, I don't see a problem for Florida as a whole to be insured. But if you look at the developments in the last 100 years, Palm Beach, you take a picture of Palm Beach 100 years ago compared to today, you wouldn't recognize. You understand why it was called Palm Beach, but you wouldn't really recognize it any longer.
Great. I think we have time for one final question, if anybody knows. Leonard, I think over there. Thanks, Leonard.
So if you had the opportunity to go back to where you started your career, what would you change? What would you do differently than how you did it now?
It's difficult to do things differently. Of course, you would probably not always do exactly what I did, but I'm happy with what I did, so I don't think I would change a lot.
Great. All right. On behalf of the HIC, we got you a small gift. I think. I'll find it. Oh, where is it? Okay. It's hidden. It's the finest champagne in St. Gallen. Here you are.
Thank you.
And thank you again very much for coming. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you, and all the best to you professionally and most importantly, personally, for your life. Thank you.